In ancient Rome, being freed from slavery wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of something far more complicated. What happened next changed lives in ways most people never hear about. It wasn't simple, it wasn't fair, and for some, it was nothing like real freedom at all. The day a Roman slave received their freedom wasn't marked by fireworks or celebration parties. Instead, it was often a quiet ceremony where a master would touch their slave's head with a rod called a vindicta, officially declaring them free. Freedom in ancient Rome came with more strings attached than a marionette puppet. Most freed slaves, called freedmen or freedwomen, didn't just walk away into the sunset. They stayed right where they were, working for their former masters. Why? Because freedom without money, connections, or job skills was about as useful as a boat made of bread. The process of freeing slaves, called manumission, happened in several ways. Some slaves bought their freedom with saved money. Others were freed in their master's will. A few earned freedom through exceptional service. When a slave was freed, they became something called liberti, which meant they had limited rights and still owed duties to their former master. This former master was now called their patronus, and the relationship was legally binding for life. The freedmen had to provide certain services to their patron called opere. These could include working certain days per year, giving gifts on special occasions, or continuing their old job. It was like getting a promotion at work, except you still had to make your old boss coffee every morning. Children born to freed slaves were considered full Roman citizens. This meant that while parents remained in a lower social class, their children could theoretically climb the social ladder. The legal status of freedmen was complex. They could own property, make contracts, and even own slaves themselves. But they couldn't vote in all the same assemblies as freeborn citizens, and they faced social discrimination throughout their lives. Some freedmen managed to accumulate enormous wealth, becoming richer than their former masters, especially in trade or business. Freedom also meant new responsibilities like paying taxes, military service, and following Roman law. Getting freedom was like finally getting your driver's license. Suddenly you had more rights, but also more ways to get in trouble. The emotional impact varied greatly. Some freedmen thrived, while others struggled with sudden responsibility and uncertainty. After years of having every decision made for them, some found the freedom to choose overwhelming. But this was just the beginning of their story. After gaining freedom, former slaves found themselves in one of history's most awkward relationships. If breaking up with someone but still having to see them at work is complicated, being legally obligated to serve your former owner for life takes it to another level entirely. The patron-client relationship was a Roman obsession. Every morning, freedmen would join crowds of clients at their patron's house for the salutatio, a daily greeting ceremony. Dozens of men in togas would stand outside a wealthy person's front door, waiting to say good morning and ask for favors. This wasn't optional socializing. Freedmen were legally required to show respect to their patron, provide services when asked, and even help financially if their patron fell on hard times. The patron, in return, was supposed to protect their freedmen legally and socially. The daily obligations were demanding. A freedman might spend their morning at the salutatio, then work in their patron's business during the day, and attend dinner parties in the evening where they served as educated entertainment. Some freedmen became incredibly valuable to their patrons. Those with specialized skills like accounting, medicine, or teaching often continued doing the same work, but with better conditions. Smart patrons invested in their freedmen's success. The relationship could benefit both parties, but it also created tensions. Freedmen who became too successful sometimes forgot their place, leading to conflict. It was like your former employee becoming your boss and pretending they don't remember when you used to tell them what to do. The legal obligations weren't just ceremonial. If a freedman tried to skip their duties, patrons could take them to court. Judges usually sided with the patron, and penalties could include fines, public humiliation, or even a return to slavery-like conditions. Geographic mobility was limited by the patron-client system. Freedmen couldn't just move to another city to start fresh. They were tied to their patron's location. This meant many remained in the same neighborhoods where they had lived as slaves. The patron-client system also affected marriage and family life. Freedmen often needed their patrons' permission to marry, and their children's futures were influenced by the patrons' social connections. Getting your boss's approval for vacation days is one thing, but needing permission to get married takes workplace involvement to extremes. Despite its restrictions, the system provided security and opportunity that many freedmen wouldn't have had otherwise. In a world without social safety nets, having a powerful patron meant having protection and access to opportunities. Security came with a price, and that price was independence. Roman society had more layers than a fancy cake, and freedmen were stuck somewhere in the middle, above slaves but below everyone else. It was like getting promoted to middle management. Better perks, but everyone still remembered when you cleaned the bathrooms. The hierarchy was rigid. At the top were senators, then equestrians, citizens, freedmen, and finally slaves. Moving up took wealth, connections, savvy, and a generous dose of luck. In a society obsessed with status, freedmen were always reminded of their past, no matter how far they'd come. Freedmen had a tough time climbing socially. No matter how rich they got, their slave past haunted them. Roman writers mocked them like ancient tabloids, calling them tacky show-offs. Being seen as too successful could even make elites feel threatened. Still, many found clever ways to gain status. They couldn't hold top offices, but could serve in religious roles, local politics, or become patrons funding public works. If you couldn't run the empire, you could at least sponsor a statue of someone who did. Education helped. Freedmen who had worked as secretaries or teachers used their skills to succeed. When your rivals still counted on fingers, mental math was a superpower. Literate freedmen were rare but valuable, especially in the growing bureaucracy and expanding economy. Business was the main road to wealth. Blocked from politics and military, they thrived in trade, finance, and manufacturing. Some built empires from humble beginnings, creating dynasties that rivaled those of noble families. They couldn't wear a toga with a purple stripe, but they could buy the guy who did. Construction offered more chances. Freedmen became architects and contractors, building Rome itself. While senators bragged about glory, freedmen stacked the bricks. Entertainment also paid off. Some trained gladiators, acted, or ran schools. If you could distract a Roman crowd, you could make a fortune. Applause wasn't the same as respect, but it paid the bills. In smaller cities, freedmen had better odds of gaining respect. Basically, the further from Rome, the fewer people cared who your old boss was. Local pride often outweighed pedigree. Marriage helped too. Freedmen often married up, and their kids climbed even higher. Social strategy, Roman addition, dowries, connections, and shared ambition made certain marriages almost like business mergers. Wealth didn't always equal status. Some rich freedmen were still excluded socially, while others earned respect with less. Sometimes being liked mattered more than being loaded. Religion offered prestige, too. Many became priests in popular cults, especially Eastern ones, embraced by the lower classes. These roles gave social standing without needing elite approval. Some invested in their children's education, setting them up for better careers and higher status. The dream: your kid becomes a lawyer, not a lamp seller. Inheritance wasn't just money, it was a chance at legitimacy. Still, full acceptance rarely came. Wealth and influence couldn't erase the freedman label, especially in elite circles. The next challenge was even more practical: how to turn their limited freedom into actual financial security. Once freedmen figured out their social position, they faced a more immediate problem: putting food on the table. Being free was great and all, but freedom doesn't pay the rent, and Roman landlords weren't exactly known for their warm hearts or flexible payment plans. The job market for freedmen was both limited and full of opportunity, depending on their skills and connections. Those who had worked in specialized roles as slaves often continued in similar positions, but with better compensation. A freedman who had been a cook might open a tavern, while one who had managed accounts might become a banker. The difference now? They got to keep the tips. Agriculture remained the backbone of the Roman economy, and many rural freedmen continued working the same land they had worked as slaves. However, now they might receive a share of the crops or even lease small plots for themselves. Same backbreaking labor, but at least now they got to call it their own blister. Urban freedmen had more diverse opportunities. The cities needed skilled craftsmen, shopkeepers, and service providers. Many became blacksmiths, carpenters, bakers, barbers, or cloth makers. Rome didn't run on marble and politics alone. Someone had to make the sandals and bread. The guilds that organized these trades were often more welcoming to freedmen than the upper classes were. The retail trade offered particular opportunities. Freedmen opened shops selling everything from pottery to perfume. They ran bakeries, operated taverns, and managed markets. Some became wholesale merchants, importing goods from across the empire. If you could haggle, carry boxes, and not get robbed, retail was your arena. Many freedmen discovered that their former slave status actually gave them certain advantages in business. They understood the needs and preferences of the lower classes better than aristocratic Romans did. Let's be honest. Who knew more about daily survival, the guy who owned slaves or the guy who had to serve dinner while dodging insults? The service industry provided steady employment. Freedmen worked as barbers, masseurs, entertainers, and attendants. Some opened bathhouses or managed gladiator schools. Others became private tutors or scribes. Basically, if a Roman citizen needed to relax, get smarter, or get stabbed in front of a crowd, a freedman made it happen. Construction offered another path to prosperity. The empire was always building roads, aqueducts, temples, theaters, and villas. Freedmen worked as architects, engineers, contractors, and skilled laborers. While senators gave speeches about the greatness of Rome, freedmen were the ones pouring the concrete. Banking and finance became more important as Rome's economy grew. Many freedmen became moneylenders, currency exchangers, or business managers. They went from counting their master's coins to lending them out with interest. The imperial bureaucracy also opened doors. The empire needed administrators, clerks, and managers. Many freedmen found steady government work. Paperwork may not have been glamorous, but it beat plowing a field or facing lions. Transportation and logistics were crucial to Roman commerce. Freedmen worked as ship captains, caravan leaders, and warehouse operators. They were the ancient FedEx, without the tracking numbers. Some freedmen got creative. They opened funeral homes, ran schools, managed rental properties, or hosted public entertainment. If there was a niche, a freedman had probably already figured out how to make money from it. The relationship with former masters often continued. Patrons would fund a freedman's business in exchange for future profits. It was like venture capitalism, Roman style, minus the pitch decks, plus a lot more guilt. Of course, business carried risks. Without insurance or bankruptcy protection, one bad shipment or crop failure could ruin everything. In Rome, you didn't file Chapter 11. You just disappeared quietly and hoped no one noticed. But the rewards could be massive, and some freedmen amassed fortunes that rivaled the aristocrats. Success brought more than comfort. Wealthy freedmen often became patrons themselves, offering support and opportunities to newer freedmen. Today's butcher could be tomorrow's mini mogul, but making money was only half the battle. The other half was keeping it safe and making sure it lasted for the next generation. Starting a family as a freedman was more complicated than just finding someone to love. If meeting your in-laws was stressful, imagine explaining you used to be property and your former owner still controlled part of your life. Marriage laws for freedmen were full of restrictions. They couldn't marry into senatorial families and often needed their patron's permission. But within their class, they could and did form strong, lasting marriages. The legal side of these unions was complex. Children of freedmen were born full Roman citizens, an upgrade in status, but families still faced social bias and financial hardship. Housing posed challenges. Many stayed in their former master's household, gaining security but little privacy. Others rented cramped apartments in the crowded insulae of Rome. Freedmen parenting often blended Roman customs with cultural traditions from their homelands. They passed on languages, foods, and values alongside Roman teachings. Education was a top priority. Freedmen who knew the limits of ignorance worked hard to give their children better options, hiring tutors, sending them to school, and teaching useful skills. Freedmen families had wide and complex networks, not just blood relatives, but also fellow freedmen, clients of the same patron, and business partners. These ties offered support and job leads. Women in freedmen households faced their own set of hurdles. Freed women had more rights than slaves, but fewer than freeborn women. They could own property and run businesses, but remained under male authority. Wives' economic roles were essential. Freed women often kept working in their former trades, now keeping their income. Some couples basically ran family businesses before it was cool. Religion reflected their diversity. Freedmen took part in Roman rites, but also worshipped the gods of their origins. Naming was complicated. Freedmen took their ex-master's family name, but often kept part of their original name. Kids had full Roman names, but good luck stopping grandma from calling them by the old nickname. Inheritance brought challenges. Freedmen had to balance providing for their children with legal obligations to leave part of their estate to their former patron's family. Freedmen celebrations mixed Roman rituals with customs from home. Weddings, for example, served both family joy and social bonding. Parent-child relationships could be tricky. Parents were proud of their citizen children, but it's hard to ground your kid when they outrank you socially. Community was key. Freedmen built clubs that offered mutual aid, help in hard times, and organized festivals. Healthcare was a constant worry. Lacking elite care, they relied on home remedies, local healers, and community help. Old age brought new struggles. Unlike the rich, freedmen had no slaves to care for them. Having successful kids wasn't just a dream, it was your pension plan. But family life was just one part of freedmen society. They also helped shape entire communities that would leave a mark on Roman culture. Freedmen didn't just adapt to Roman society, they transformed it. While the upper classes were busy debating philosophy and politics, freedmen were actually creating the vibrant, diverse culture that made Roman cities exciting places to live. Freedmen communities developed their own distinct character within Roman cities. They clustered in certain neighborhoods, often near markets and artisan districts where their businesses could thrive. These areas became melting pots of cultures, languages, and traditions from across the empire. Religious life was particularly rich in freedmen communities. While they participated in official Roman religious ceremonies, they also maintained temples and shrines dedicated to gods from their homelands. The Romans were pretty flexible about gods. They figured more divine protection couldn't hurt, especially when running a business. The college system, basically ancient Roman social clubs, became central to freedmen life. These organizations brought together people in similar trades or from similar backgrounds. They provided insurance, organized festivals, maintained burial grounds, and offered social support. Think of them as a combination of trade union, insurance company, and social club rolled into one. Freedmen burial practices reveal a lot about their communities. Their tombs were often elaborate affairs that proclaimed their success and respectability. Even in death, freedmen wanted to make sure everyone knew they had made it. Roman tombstones were basically ancient LinkedIn profiles carved in stone. The arts flourished in freedmen communities. They patronized theaters, commissioned artwork, and supported musicians and entertainers. Food culture was revolutionized by freedmen communities. They introduced new dishes, cooking techniques, and ingredients from across the empire. The Roman Empire's greatest achievement might not have been its roads or its laws, but its restaurants. The economic impact of freedmen communities was enormous. They created jobs, paid taxes, and drove commerce. Their businesses served not just other freedmen, but the entire urban population. While senators were making grand speeches about Roman glory, freedmen were the ones actually making the money that paid for it. Education within freedmen communities emphasized practical skills alongside Roman culture. They established schools that taught everything from basic literacy to advanced technical skills. Medical care relied heavily on traditional healing practices, with many freed women becoming respected healers and midwives. The architectural contributions of freedmen communities were significant. They built temples, shops, workshops, and apartment buildings that shaped Roman cities. Politicians might have planned the empire, but freedmen literally constructed it brick by brick. Trade networks created by freedmen communities extended across the empire. Their businesses connected different regions, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. They were instrumental in creating the economic integration that held the empire together. The charitable activities of freedmen communities were extensive. Wealthy freedmen regularly donated to schools, temples, and public works. They provided food for the poor and helped fellow freedmen in times of need. They understood that helping others was not just morally right, but also good for business and community stability. Over time, the boundaries between freedmen communities and the broader Roman population became increasingly blurred. Intermarriage, business partnerships, and shared cultural experiences created a more integrated society, though social distinctions never completely disappeared. The story of Roman freedmen reveals the complexity and dynamism of ancient societies. These communities of former slaves didn't just survive, they thrived, contributing to every aspect of Roman life while maintaining their distinct identities and values.